Episode 6, Chapter 6, Rogues Galleria. Chapter 6, Rogues Galleria. Mario strolled down the boardwalk, breathing in the warm sea spray and listening to the hustle and bustle of the mid-morning market. It was a prettier day than he had seen in a while, especially in this new world where simple beauties were hard to find. A gentle breeze blew in from the ocean, warming his skin and tickling the hairs of his mustache. High above, seagulls soared and glided like kites through the sky, riding the salty sea air from the beach to the marketplace and back again. A trio of young toads dashed past, laughing and chasing each other until they vanished amidst the busy market stalls. Vivian wasn't far behind, as usual. The siren had offered to join him on his morning walk, under the pretense of doing some much-needed grocery shopping for the group. Mario suspected that she had actually come along out of worry over his injury, despite his insistence that he was mending well and knew how to look after himself. Still, he was glad to have her company. There was a certain sense of sweet nostalgia about it all, the two of them, between chapters of a quest, wandering the streets of Rogueport together. Mario slowed his steps so she could catch up, taking a moment just to listen to the gulls and the breaking waves. When she glided up beside him a few seconds later, he noticed a picked-apart bread roll in her hand, and guessed that she had been stopping along the way to feed the scavenging birds.
"That's a bad idea, Viv,"
he thought, shaking his head.
"Someday, one of those things is going to bite your hand off."
He smiled and offered her an arm, which she shyly accepted with a smile of her own, and together the two friends set off into the bazaar, in search of groceries and adventure. As they made their way through the crowd, Mario thought back on recent events. It had been nearly a week since he and his friends had arrived in town, and he had learned that Rogueport was very different here. Back home, this place was generally seen as a scummy den of cutthroats and thieves, but here, it had become a thriving seaside market town. It was well known that Don Pianta had connections within the empire, but he used them to keep the regime's sinister army safely outside the walls. As such, the town had become something of a haven for those who opposed the Empress. As long as business was booming, and the right hands were getting their cut of the profits, the old Don seemed perfectly happy to turn a blind eye. Mario wasn't a fan of such shady practices in general, but even he had to admit that the old town was several degrees prettier and cleaner than he had ever seen it. The air smelled fresher, the grass was greener, and innocent folks could walk the streets at all, well, most hours of the day without fear. Even the sky seemed brighter here, and the untrained eye might even mistake it for daylight. The rumor on the street was that a crew of intrepid smugglers had hauled a crate or two of shine sprites from faraway Isle Delfino, and that now the artifacts were hidden around town, generating their pseudo-sunlight for everyone to enjoy. The sight had been quite a shock when the group had first arrived, driving through the newly polished hardwood city gates in their battered old truck. Mario, and likely everyone else, had expected the usual stink and squalor, but the early morning ocean mist had parted over the plaza to prove them all wrong. Vibrant storefronts and trading stalls dominated the shoreline, as exotic merchant ships filled the wide bay beyond. Busy crowds scurried back and forth between the shops, as families spent time by the grand fountain statue that had once been a menacing hangman's gallows. It was a statue of Flavio, standing tall and proud. The inscription read, "Generously paid for by Flavio and the Flavio Foundation."
"This is not what I was expecting," Bao had muttered as she glanced uncertainly around at the friendly view. "Is this Rogueport, or have you taken us to Fair Square by mistake?"
"Nah, this is the place," Gumbella had lazily opened an eye, waking up from the light nap she had been taking.
"Like I said earlier, it's the only place I know of that isn't a mess."
Not long after, Rolf had pulled the truck into a shady gravel lot on the east side of town.
"Well, here's home base, he had said, hopping out and reaching into the bed for a load of supplies. You all should be safe enough here, until we find a way to put you back where you came from. It's not that we don't like you, Raz had clarified while picking up some supplies of his own, but the sooner you and your princess are back where you belong, the safer I'll feel. Whatever Empress Toadstool is planning, I want no part of it. After everyone had gathered up an armful of gas station loot, the resistance had led their guests into the underground via a precarious iron stairway at the back of a narrow alley. Despite the surface city's makeover, it seemed that the subterranean sewer district had hardly changed a bit. Unsavory types still lurked in their dank warrens or gathered in their makeshift taverns, and the air was still damp and musty with untold centuries' worth of mold. Naturally, the Amanita Resistance's main base of operations was located here, in a tumble-down stone complex beneath the eastern waterfront. Half of the building leaned precariously out over a dark chasm, and the rest just had to be flooded from the waterfalls of bay runoff spilling onto the roof. It looked like a total ruin, but that had turned out to be the entire point. Past the facade, they had found a spacious and well-equipped hidden lair. The main room had been made into a cozy living area, haphazardly decorated with tables, sofas, and a giant screen TV situated against the far wall. Hallways branched off every which way, leading to secluded libraries, packed storage areas, and snug bedrooms. Rolf had given them permission to pick their own sleeping quarters, but warned them to stay out of the westernmost hallway. Those rooms were empty, Goombella had explained, because that wing really was crumbling into the chasm. Also inside, to Mario's mild surprise, they had found Professor Frankly. The old Goomba had been fascinated by their tale, and had answered with his own. In this timeline, he had first come to the city to research its myths and legends, but had stayed to host the resistance in an extension of his cellar. True enough, a hole in the back wall led through into the professor's original basement, fully cluttered as usual with books and trinkets from every age of the world. In addition to the professor, they had learned that Wonky, the information broker, was an informant for the group. The twin Boo sisters, Pika and Lala, were casual affiliates as well, when they weren't busy managing affairs for the Pianta Syndicate. At the very least, they liked to hang around the base during their off hours, a fact which delighted Lady Bow and utterly horrified poor Luigi. In the days since, the group had settled back into some semblance of a normal routine. Mario would go for a walk every morning, venturing a little bit further each day as his strength gradually returned. In the afternoon, he would return to help out his brother, who had taken to spending all day poring over books in the libraries, gathering details about the last 20 years of this world's history. It just doesn't sit right with me, bro,
Luigi had told him one night as he schemed a history textbook that the professor had loaned him.
It just has to be connected, you know? All of this, why Peach was kidnapped, the thing with the stars, why the other versions of us aren't around. Maybe so,
Mario had replied, glancing at Luigi's choice of reading material,
but I doubt that the key to your theory is hiding in a 5th grade textbook.
Luigi had looked at the cover, gave a dismayed little grunt, then went right back to reading.
All I know is, the sooner we solve this mystery, the sooner we can go home. I don't like this place, Mario.
As for the others, they each found their own simple ways to pass the time. Vivian enjoyed the markets, while Yoshi and Bao spent long hours each evening at the lavish Pianta parlor downtown. The professor often helped Luigi with his research, and at some point the two had shanghaied Toad into the group. Toadette, meanwhile, had clearly begun to idolize Goombella, as she stuck to the older girl like glue. The Goomba typically spent her days gathering information in the streets, and Mario couldn't help but wonder how her overeager new groupie was impacting her job performance.
It's like a mentor-student kind of thing,
she had insisted.
A girl has to learn street smarts at some point in her life.
Mario might have believed it, had he not twice walked in on them playing video games during the busiest hours of the day. So the days passed, and the world slowly began to seem a little less bleak. Between friends and fake sunlight, it was sometimes hard to see the shadow of the empire looming over their lives, until nighttime brought the cold darkness back, and with it an ominous reminder of the hardships to come. There would be many battles to fight, Mario knew, as soon as the party had a lead on where to go. But today, he wasn't going to think about that. It was a beautiful morning, relatively speaking, and his only mission was to enjoy the fresh air for as long as he could. That, and maybe to help his easily distracted friend with her shopping. It seemed that Vivian needed all the aid she could get, as every new kiosk they passed enthralled her all over again. Just now, she was eagerly listening to a fishmonger give a spiel on the tastiest way to prepare blooper. Calamari wasn't on the shopping list, so Mario gently pulled her away. Unfortunately, not before he got a whiff of seafood that made his stomach growl pitifully. The marketplace was a constant surge of sights and smells, and Mario wasn't exactly known for having a small appetite. He was meant to be getting some exercise, but between the ripe fruit, the varied types of colorful mushrooms, and the omnipresent fresh fish, he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold out.
I never knew that people ate bloopers, Vivian idly remarked as they passed a fisherman's pier lined halfway to the horizon and back with more shops. I mean, some of them talk. Isn't that kind of weird?
Mario shrugged.
Yoshi eats Goombas and Koopas, but nobody really questions it anymore.
His dinosaur friend was actually a pretty vicious predator, if he thought about it. He decided not to think about it, or eating in general. He tried to distract himself by people watching, but he soon found himself fully overwhelmed. It's typical to see foreigners in a port, but this throng contained nearly every race he had ever seen. Toads and Goombas bought items from Boos, Bob-ombs, and Yoshis of every color. Piantas and penguins operated stalls side by side. There was even a cheerful wiggler curled up beneath an awning, selling humongous homegrown carrots.
There's someone here from every place I've ever been, he marveled, and probably people from everywhere else, too.
There were no Koopas, though. Not a single shell to be seen. Mario found that a bit odd, although he supposed it was likely a coincidence. Besides, Koopas weren't exactly known as a seafaring species, were they? Leaving the docks behind, Mario and Vivian started down a wide airy tunnel not far off the main street. More shoppers milled about inside, seeking shade beneath the gently arching canopy. To the left, a wilted beanish man was selling exotic coffee blends at a fancy wooden booth. Vivian stopped for a free sample, before remembering that she wasn't very fond of coffee. To their right, a rotund stony creature was selling small rock piles for exorbitant prices. Vivian just had to ask, apparently the rocks were delicious. A few yards further on, there was a shaved ice machine being operated by a cheerful bumpty couple. Vivian bought two, and Mario gave in to his hunger, just this once. It was basically just water, right? The arcade opened into a flagstone courtyard behind the town's central plaza, tucked away out of sight by a row of ancient brick buildings. At the other end, where the faux sunshine was brightest, picnic tables and cozy wicker chairs marked the exterior seating area of the Toad Sisters' kitchen. In this timeline, it seemed that Tasty had fled the ruined Toad Town to open a family restaurant with her sisters. If the line outside the door was any indication, the venture had been a total success.
I'd like to eat there, just once, Mario thought, before it's time to leave for good.
Nearby, a switchback fire escape in a shady alley led up to the rooftops, and to the secret thieves' highways that Mario knew ran between the buildings.
I wonder,
he idly began, his eyes wandering nostalgically from roof to roof. When Vivian glanced at him curiously, he pointed upwards and continued.
Do you think you know who is still in business?
Vivian nearly choked on her spoon straw as she tried to stifle a grin.
Are you talking about her?
She asked, swallowing some ice.
Why wouldn't she be? Oh, because she's a thief, right?
Mario was suddenly dying to know. Rogueport had cleaned up its thieving image, but he suspected that someone like her would only see that as a fun new challenge. If anything, she was probably having the time of her life up there.
Let's go see,
he offered, leading Vivian to the stairs.
We're out shopping anyway, right? Are badges on the shopping list?
She asked, putting a finger to her chin in thought.
I'm not sure we should get distracted.
It was only when she started to climb up anyway that Mario realized that she, shy little Vivian, had actually just teased him. He finished his snack and followed her up, emerging out of the shade and into the half-light. Up here, with the wind on his face and the ocean view before him, Mario felt healthier than he had all week. He walked to the very edge, his heart beginning to race. Not from fear, but from an excitement he hadn't felt since his injury that night at the castle. Some people were scared of heights, he knew, but ledges and platforms had always given him an indescribable thrill. When he was high in the air, flipping and spinning in his natural element, he felt like he could achieve anything. Vivian was busy admiring the view, so Mario decided to take a chance. He had left the base to get exercise, after all, and right now all he could think about was the enticing sight of rooftops stretching far and away across the proud old city.
I've taken it easy for long enough,
he decided.
It's time for Super Mario to get back in action.
Giving an experimental hop up onto a chimney, he grinned wide at the lack of pain in his leg. Leaping the narrow gap to the next building, he eyed the vista and planned a course across the plaza. He inhaled a great breath of salty sea air, adjusted his cap, and took off at a sprint. He heard Vivian let out a startled gasp behind him, and the faint sound of a dropped cup, but kept right on going. He knew she was worried, but there was nothing to worry about. Not here, not anymore. Across the eaves, up a gable and down the other side, slip between two chimneys, then leap across the alley to the next building. Side somersault, vault off the weather vane, spin jump to a higher roof and keep going. After days spent on the ground, he was finally living again. Why had he been so cautious before? He would make it all the way to the waterfront, and then he would make it all the way back. Vivian would be so proud of him. It didn't even matter that his leg was starting to sting. That just meant his blood was pumping, right? Slide down the A-frame, double wall jump, grab this hanging pipe, kick off and grab that other one, then swing up and over to level ground. He'd have to pull Luigi away from his books later, and they'd have themselves a race. A larger gap was coming up ahead, and that meant there was a street below, at least 3 stories down and 30 feet across.
No problem,
Mario thought,
all it takes is a triple jump.
There was no need to stop and reposition himself, as everything was already lined up perfectly. He could practically see the perfect arc traced in the air before him. A last-second sprint, followed by one jump, then the next, and then... He tripped, his injured leg giving out under the impact and sending him tumbling off course. Helplessly falling head over heels, Mario's own velocity and momentum sent him careening toward the edge like a stone in a landslide. His vision was a senseless blur of bricks and sky, and he had no hope of stopping himself, but just in time the shadows tore open beneath him and he fell safely into Vivian's soft embrace.
What in the world were you thinking?
She yelled, her voice echoing throughout the abyss. Disoriented as he was, Mario couldn't tell if she was terrified or livid, or both. She was holding on to him for dear life as they floated together in her dark realm beneath reality. Slowly, Surely, he came back to himself. The shadows spat him out moments later, back on solid ground. In a flash, Vivian emerged beside him and began prodding gingerly at his leg. It didn't take Mario long to notice that there were tears in her lavender eyes.
"I'm sorry,"
he tried lamely to apologize.
"I'm not sure what brought that on. It's just been so long since."
He trailed off. Since what? Since he had stupidly endangered himself? He was doing that often of late. He had always taken risks, but this was different. Vivian seemed to silently shrink into herself, sitting down against a chimney and pulling her shadowy tail up to her chin.
"You almost died,"
she whispered, glancing away. Is that what she believed? Mario sat down beside her, leaning back against the warm bricks.
"I would have been fine, Viv,"
he tried to comfort her.
"I've missed jumps before, but I always get back up again, right? There was this one time, in Brooklyn, back before we met."
The siren let out a choked sob, hiding her face.
"At the castle, last week,"
she exclaimed in utter disbelief.
"Yeah, you ran off without me, and you almost got killed. Do you even know how that feels?"
She wiped her eyes with her scarf, but fresh tears just kept falling.
"And then, when you came back to me, I didn't even know how to help you. I could have used my powers to heal you right then, but I didn't know."
Mario was astonished. He hadn't heard any of this before.
"I heard it differently,"
he told her.
"I heard that you helped save me."
She didn't look up, so he continued.
"Besides, I'm fine now, almost. Crisis averted, right?"
That evidently wasn't the answer she wanted, because she glared daggers at him.
"Yeah, you said, every mistake is a lesson, didn't you? Weren't you going to learn something from what you did?"
She squeezed her eyes shut as wisps of pale gray smoke curled from her fists.
But you didn't learn anything after all. You left me behind again, and then you almost got hurt again." "She's right,"
he realized, suddenly feeling a bit ashamed.
"I felt the rush of adventure again, and I just forgot about everything else. I guess I really didn't learn anything."
Now, he couldn't even think of something else to say. Vivian flopped over against him, tired and desperate.
"I can't do this by myself. I can't be in this horrible place if you're not here."
She looked down, a few loose strands of pink hair spilling onto his chest. She sunk her hand into the shadows and began to idly swirl her fingers around.
"Every time it's dark, I feel like I'm being watched. When I go into the shadows here, it feels like something is trying to grab me and pull me in deeper. I can't make sense of that, and I need you, because you saved me before."
Her voice dropped to barely a whisper,
"And because I—"
She lapsed into silence, her thought unfinished. Mario was ashamed of himself.
"Mamma mia, what a mess,"
he thought,
"and it's all my fault."
He gathered her into a hug, and let her cry against his shoulder.
"I'm here,"
he told her,
"and we'll go the rest of the way together. I promise."
She murmured in response, so he leaned back and they sat in silence for a while. It must have been late afternoon by the time he felt himself being gently prodded awake. He opened his eyes to the world, stretching his arms wide and yawning the last of the sleepiness away. Vivian was still beside him, her expression blank.
"Sorry, I dozed off,"
he told her, hoping that him taking a nap hadn't made her feel worse. To his surprise, she softly smiled.
"It's okay, so did I,"
she sheepishly admitted as she tried to brush her hair back into shape. There were still faint tear stains down her cheeks, but her eyes and her smile were bright.
We, never went badge shopping, did we? The shop is still open, though. I checked.
Mario got to his feet, and she did the same. For a given definition of feet, anyway. He wasn't sure why he had never noticed before, but she was quite pretty when she smiled. As it turned out, the lovely house of badges had been just beneath them the whole time. If Ms. Mouse had been at all concerned about the two strangers napping on her roof, she most certainly didn't show it when said strangers finally entered the shop. The porcelain white squeak came bounding up to greet them, and Mario was hit with the profound sense, for just a moment, that nothing had changed at all.
Oh, my. A brand new customer. And quite a handsome one at that.
Ms. Mouse was all business, and her business usually involved a lot of flirting. She hopped around Mario for a moment, getting the measure of him, before widening her eyes in surprise as Vivian made her way through the door.
Who's this, now? Could my handsome hunk of cheese be taken already? Oh well, no matter. There's more than enough room in my house for all three of us this evening.
Mario vaguely remembered that Ms. Mouse had a business partner back home, but he wasn't anywhere in sight. Perhaps it was his night off, or maybe he simply didn't exist here. Either way, his absence left Mario and Vivian at the coquettish mercy of their lone hostess.
Do come in, sweeties.
The proprietress hopped back onto a small box, ushering Mario and Vivian further into the room.
So, are you buying gifts for a friend? Or maybe you're buying special gifts for each other, I think we're just browsing,
Vivian said, her curious eyes wandering over the shelves.
But thank you all the same.
The squeak's whiskers drooped, just a little, but she perked back up in an instant.
Just let me know if you change your mind, sweetie. I have quite the selection, after all.
She certainly spoke the truth. The brown brick walls of the building were lined with shelves, and those shelves were themselves lined with glittering badges of every color and shape. Little pink hearts, shiny white flowers, and a rainbow of musical notes lined the counters in perfect rows. A whole jar of tiny emblems shaped like boots and hammers sat on a box by the window, no two alike. These were only the common badges, Mario knew. The truly rare finds, the ones Ms. Mouse had acquired in her spare time, would be safely out of sight somewhere in the back. Truth be told, Mario had always been fascinated by badges. The enchanted little trinkets always offered him fresh new surprises, each one warding off danger or enhancing his skills in some crazy way. Over the years, their versatility had come in handy more times than he cared to count. Plus, they were pretty dang fun to collect. He ran his hand along the countertop, scanning the selection for designs that he knew. Here was a badge that would make his attacks sound like fart noises. Good for a laugh, but not much else. Beside it was a little diamond that would make him sturdier, but cost him some coordination in exchange. With all the flips and jumps he did, that wouldn't suit his style at all. Ms. Mouse hummed a melody to herself in the background, and Vivian was sifting through one of the colorful jars by the window. Mario was about to suggest that they be on their way, when a pair of tiny yellow starbursts caught his eye. Two pretty lucky badges lay side by side on the counter, sitting in the perfect spot to catch the dancing afternoon light from the window. One was a bright yellow sun on a sky blue square, the other was identical, save for the tiny smiling face in the corner. Mario knew these badges by sight. In battle, their special magic would sometimes cause enemy attacks to harmlessly miss their intended victims.
You like those, do you?
Ms. Mouse had spotted his idle curiosity, and was moving in for the kill. She was a shameless flirt, but she would use that skill to make every sale that she possibly could.
They're a matching set, you know. You could buy one for yourself, and one for your hazy cutie, too.
Thinking about it, buying these badges would be a nice gesture. He and Vivian had just been arguing about keeping safe, hadn't they? This would show that he had taken her concerns seriously, and that he was thinking of her as well.
How much are they?
He finally asked. The squeak grinned triumphantly, sweeping the matching badges into a little plastic bag with an expert swish of her tail.
Standard price? For this level of rarity, it's 150 coins each, my sweet.
300 coins? This was bad. Mario knew he didn't have that much. He turned out his pockets, but found only 13 coins and a half-peeled thing sticker bearing the image of a fridge. He frowned. He didn't like to think about his sticker adventure very often. It was a bit too surreal, even for him.
Have you found something? Ooh, what are those?
Vivian had finished her sweep of the shop, and was now looking over Mario's shoulder at the badges in the bag.
Wait, I know this. They're, the ones that help you evade, right? Pretty lucky badges. They're meant to keep us safe.
Mario nodded, showing her the 13 coins in his hand.
But it looks like they're too expensive.
Vivian opened her own coin purse, but her long morning of impulse shopping had left it nearly bare.
I only have 20 coins left, I'm sorry. Maybe if I hadn't bought that shaved ice, or that nasty coffee, or those daisy seeds, or...
Ms. Mouse looked from the hero, to the siren, and back again. With a roll of her eyes and a pointed sigh, she finally said,
300 coins is standard price, I said. You're first-timers, and such a super cute couple besides, so...
She looked like she was struggling to get the words out, her businesswoman side brutally at war with her romantic thief side.
I suppose, just this once, I could offer you a 90% discount.
Mario was inclined to take the offer, but Vivian, polite as ever, immediately tried her best to refuse.
Oh, we couldn't. That wouldn't be very fair to you at all.
She thought a moment, then frantically added,
but besides, we aren't even a... Don't talk nonsense!
The squeak cried, and Mario was sure he saw her left eye twitch very slightly behind her domino mask. She hopped forward, pawing at the coins and practically shoving the bag into Mario's face.
These badges belong together, so that means they belong with you.
In the end, Mario and Vivian handed over the last of their money and took the badges. Ms. Mouse blew them a kiss as they left, but Mario was pretty sure he heard her mutter something vaguely like cheapskates as the door shut behind them. Outside on the terrace, the light was just beginning to fade for the evening. The shine sprites, wherever they were hidden, were ever so gradually losing their daily charge. Mario had seen this phenomenon before throughout the week. It looked nothing like a sunset, but more like a slow, sad graying of the world. Sighing, he upturned the little bag and shook the pair of badges out into his hand. Vivian had her eyes on the sky, so he lightly tapped her shoulder to gain her attention. He held up the trinket that was meant for her, the one with the tiny face, and she shyly offered the end of her scarf. Smiling, Mario stepped forward to pin the badge where it belonged, but as he drew near, he saw something over the siren's shoulder that made his blood run ice cold. Several stories down below, by the granite statue in the plaza, a hooded figure stood watching them in silence. The people of Rogueport milled about, paying it no mind like it wasn't even there. The figure's cloak rippled in the subtle ocean breeze blowing in from the bay, but otherwise it may have been a statue itself. Mario felt his whole body tense. It had found them. Somehow, against all reason, this thing had tracked them down halfway across the continent. Was it going to be a battle, then? Right here in the plaza, with all these innocents nearby? Vivian must have noticed his apprehension, because she spun around to see what he was staring at. She barely had time to gasp before the figure fled, breaking into a sudden mad sprint down the busy street. Okay, so it wasn't going to be a battle after all. It was going to be a chase.
Even better for me, then,
Mario mused to himself.
We'll be playing by my rules.
He nodded to Vivian and adjusted his cap, getting ready for the challenge ahead. He hastily planned a new course down the rooftops, across alleys, and over the city once again, but he had hardly taken a step before a fresh surge of pain stopped him in his tracks. As he hissed through his teeth, the shadow girl rushed to his side, holding an arm out for support.
Of all the rotten luck,
Mario growled, bending over and rubbing his thigh as he watched his enemy flee into the distance.
I spent all the strength I had saved up on the practice run.
He turned to face Vivian, whose breathing was starting to become shallow with anxiety.
You'll have to go after it alone, okay?
She shook her head frantically, almost violently, and pulled him to his feet.
No, I can't do this by myself. We just talked about this, and you made a promise.
Her breaths were short and sharp, and she looked about 3 wrong words away from a panic attack.
Well, we'll go together. You can lean on me if you need to, but please help me. I'm useless like this,
he growled, hating the words more than anything else in the world.
We can't let that thing get away. It might report to the Empress, or whoever else, and then we'll have a whole army to deal with.
He looked her in the eye, silently willing her to be as brave as he knew she could be. She still looked uncertain, so he tried a different approach.
Vivian, you can do this,
he told her firmly, taking her hands in his.
You might not believe it, but you're so strong. I can't always be there to help you, but I'll always believe in you, because I know what you can do if you try.
Vivian was silent for a moment, but then she closed her tired eyes and took a few deep, calming breaths.
Okay, I'll go,
she finally said, inching her way back to the edge of the roof.
But you're not useless. Please, never think that. If you say so,
Mario smiled, realizing that she had confessed to feeling the same.
How about I make my way back to base to tell the others? That'll give me something to do while you're being a heroine.
She blushed slightly, but nodded. An instant later, she had vanished into the twilight shadows underfoot. He walked to the edge and watched carefully until he saw her reappear in the streets far below. As she sped off down the road, he gave her a small salute and turned to head across the bridge to the Rogueport Inn, and the safe way down.
Next time, we'll do it together,
he assured himself. In another day or two, his leg would be healed completely. When that time came, he'd be back and better than ever.
Next time. But for now, she's got this.
The hooded figure tore a path through the evening crowd like a particularly frenzied bullet bill, and Vivian struggled after it as best as she could. It wasn't going very well for her. The market was long over, but this part of town was a swirling sea of busy people nonetheless. Satisfied shoppers were making their way home, and merchants had begun the long process of packing things up. Poor Vivian was caught in the middle, desperately swimming against the tide.
Excuse me. Out of the way, please,
she begged, pushing her way past a cluster of chattering Goombas and a rather important-looking yellow Pianta. Up ahead, her target was getting further and further away.
If I could just squeeze through, that would be.
Every now and then, she met people who mistook her for a ghost, but she couldn't float or phase through solid objects like one. Sometimes, like right now, she found herself wishing that she had Lady Beau's skill set instead of her own. Intangibility, flight, style, charm, confidence.
No. What am I thinking?
She pushed the unwanted thought back out of the way, just barely dodging a rather hefty toad who had taken up most of the path.
I need to focus on what I can do with my powers. Mario is counting on me.
She could travel so much faster in the shadows, but every time she submerged, there it was again. That spooky sense of being watched. A dreadful feeling that she couldn't explain, and one that she just couldn't shake, no matter how hard she tried. No, the shadows were a last resort until she knew what that little puzzle was all about. She didn't particularly want to use fire, either. Vivian didn't have enough faith in her aim to start blasting projectiles around, especially in a huge crowd like this. If she missed even one shot, someone was likely going to end up badly hurt. Truth be told, she wasn't very comfortable with the idea of using either of her powers, and that gave the hooded figure a huge advantage. It didn't seem to care who it harmed, or how many passers-by it had to knock over in its blind dash for freedom.
I have to catch up, that's all there is to it.
The chase led her down busy streets and through long-forgotten courtyards, over low stone walls and past dilapidated old houses in areas that the economic boom hadn't quite reached. The cloaked creature's escape plan didn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it at all. It would dart down alleys at random, doubling back and twisting the route. And Vivian's tummy, in bizarre knots.
How does Mario do this all the time? I'm not sure if I can keep this up.
When they found themselves on an empty backstreet, she decided that she didn't have anything to lose. In a flash, a bright flame appeared in her hand, embers swishing between her fingers like blazing petals as she ran. The figure was right in front of her, an easy target. She wound back her arm, took a deep breath, aimed as carefully as she could, let the fire fly, and she missed, but the sudden explosion caused the figure to shriek and turn sharply in another direction. In Vivian's head, a plan immediately clicked into place.
If I can herd it through the empty streets, maybe I can trap it. Even better, maybe I could lead it back toward Mario, and then...
So the chase became a frightening little game. Every time the figure approached an intersection, Vivian would toss fireballs until it turned in the direction she wanted it to go. She wasn't certain, but she thought she was driving it back towards the lovely house of badges. After a few distressingly unfamiliar twists and turns, the siren began to recognize bits of the scenery again. A street corner here, a storefront there. At one point, she caught a glimpse of the bay between two buildings as she ran past. This was it.
Just go left here, then right, then...
She had gotten turned around again, but maybe left was the right way? She launched a barrage of fire, and together she and the mysterious figure emerged from the secluded alley. Back out onto the main streets, and back into the crowds.
No. I was making so much progress.
This wasn't good, but Vivian had come too far to start playing it safe again. Swallowing her guilt, she prepared another fireball, and began looking for a safe place to shoot. The figure was making a beeline for another alley across the street, so Vivian reluctantly aimed for a tall stack of woven wicker baskets which ignited like dry hay and sent the figure banking hard to the left in fright. Veering around the fire she had set, Vivian saw her target amidst a cluster of produce stands beside the alley entrance. Her next fireball hit an untended cabbage cart, detonating the veggies in a great spray, but the figure slipped through the blast and kept right on going. People were shouting in distress, but Vivian couldn't afford to listen. She was gaining ground, but there was still plenty of distance to close. To her surprise, the great covered galleria was just ahead, the one she had bought shaved ice in with Mario that morning. Before she knew it, the figure had slipped between some craft stalls and vanished into the covered plaza. Vivian sighed and stumbled to a halt, partly from desperation but mostly from exhaustion. She was nearly out of stamina, and she wasn't about to go burning down the entire market to continue her ill-fated scheme. There was nothing else to be done but face her fears and take the plunge. She had done this 1,000,000,000 times before back home. Heck, she had done it twice today already. So what was the big deal? Taking barely a second to gather herself, she collapsed her body into the ocean of darkness that ran beneath the world. Down here, she was tethered to nothing. Free to swim wherever she wished, at whatever speed she chose. She could see the entire marketplace from beneath, slightly shimmering behind a gossamer fog. She watched as panicked citizens tried to put out the fire. She listened as muffled voices yelled hysterically about cabbages. But suddenly that evil feeling was creeping back. She wasn't alone. Down here, there was something tracking her through the abyss, even as she tried to focus her sights on the world above. It was something fast and mean, and she had to get out of here as fast as she could. She sped off through the darkness, suddenly remembering that she had a villain to catch. It didn't take her long to spot the hooded figure. It had turned out of the Galleria and into the first narrow alley that it had passed. Vivian swam beneath the pavement, fluid and silent as the shadow she was. The figure had no hope of escape. As soon as the crowd was out of sight, she pounced from the abyss and tumbled with her quarry down onto the flagstones.
"I've got you!"
Vivian cried triumphantly, pinning the figure to the ground.
"You thought you could get away from us, but too bad. Now you're going to answer for everything you did, you meanie." "Ack! I'm being assaulted!"
the figure cried, thrashing about like a scared animal caught in a net.
"Guards! Guards! Somebody get this savage harpy off of me!"
Its voice was unexpectedly shrill. Vivian had expected something more deep and threatening. Also, she certainly didn't expect it to have such an oddly long nose, or such pale, blue-gray hair.
"Well, wait a second,"
Vivian thought, sliding back and loosening her grip. The figure indignantly jerked back and away to freedom, hood falling away at last to reveal the gaunt, bony face of her eldest sister.
"But Beldam! It's been you this whole time!"
For a moment, Vivian was shocked beyond belief, but then the puzzle started assembling itself.
"Oh, I remember now. You lived in Rogueport, back when you were still evil and, trying to open the 1,000-year door."
The sad reality of the situation began to sink in.
"Well, wait, you're not the one who attacked us before, are you? Oh my stars, I just chased you all over town like a total psycho."
"That's right," Beldam spat, glaring up at her captor.
"I thought I was done with you, but here we are."
She put a hand to her hunched back and gave a pained little groan.
"Of all the old shames that could have caught up with me, it had to be my feral animal of a sister."
Of course, this wasn't the Beldam that Vivian knew. The hag in front of her was this world's version of Beldam, and a total stranger. She had to keep that in mind. If she slipped up, there's no telling what might happen.
"What brought you back? Revenge, for me selling you off like chattel?"
Beldam turned away, but made no move to run again.
"Go on, take it. All my plans have dried up, anyway. I've failed our queen, so what good am I? Just end my suffering." No. It's not like that at all. In fact, I'm not even the same."
She cut herself off. She had almost revealed the truth, but maybe it was a better idea to play along? Perhaps she could learn something.
I mean, I'm not the same me I was back then."
It wasn't exactly a lie, was it? Beldam turned back, incredulous.
"Well, you're speaking in complete sentences now, so at least you have that.
Vivian tried to think of ways she could act feral, like Beldam had said earlier. Should she snarl or twitch, or would that be too much? In the end, she settled for tousling up her hair and sort of slumping her shoulders a bit.
Just look at you, you wretch,
the older siren continued.
Your hair is a mess, your scarf is in tatters and it's wet.
She tugged on the scarf, and Vivian let out a little choked noise that was only partly an act.
Why, I probably should have just put you out of your misery, like I did with that other one, who just kept eating all the time.
The hag slithered in circles around her, poking and prodding at a few uncomfortable spots.
Although, by the look of you, you haven't exactly been dieting yourself.
To be honest, Vivian hadn't ever thought much about what her alternate self might be like, but hearing Beldam talk, it sounded like something very unpleasant had happened between the two sisters. That wasn't surprising, but she was curious how things might have differed from her own life.
I'm here because I want to hear your side of the story,
she began, very carefully. She needed context, but had to keep up the act. She slumped a bit more, just for good measure.
Tell me why you did, all the stuff that you did. Listen to me, Vivian.
Beldam stopped pacing and looked her squarely in the eyes.
It's not my fault that you came out wrong. When I found you down there in the pits, all gross and broken, I did my best to take care of you.
She threw up her arms in long-felt exasperation.
I tried to be a good sister. I did. But then everything fell apart, and I just couldn't.
Vivian was very confused. In her world, she had been found by Beldam and Marilyn in a dark pit, and for a long time after that, she had certainly felt gross and broken. But she had turned out all right, hadn't she? What was different here?
So I sold you to the circus, and off you went.
Beldam kept trying to explain herself.
I thought maybe they could get some use out of you. The last I heard, you had escaped or something. I had hoped you were happy somewhere, but I suppose you were too busy tracking me down. But I am happy now.
Vivian blurted out. She thought about the situation for a moment, and decided to go with her heart. What Beldam had done was horrid, but what else was new? Vivian knew that her sister could be a better person if she tried. She had proven it once before, back home. She wanted to give this other version of Beldam the same chance, if she could.
I forgive you, okay? For everything, even the bad stuff.
Wait, what?
I mean, especially the bad stuff. Why would I forgive you for the good stuff? Was there any good stuff?
Beldam rolled her eyes and backed away.
Oh, how gracious of you. I'll certainly be able to sleep peacefully tonight, knowing all that.
She turned to leave, feebly reaching down to grab her cloak as she did.
Oh wait, no I won't, because you threw out my back when you attacked me.
Finally, she pulled her hood back up, hiding her wizened face once more.
But thank you. It helps a little, knowing I didn't fail at everything.
As the hag retreated down the alley, slinking back towards the busy galleria, Vivian suddenly remembered a question that she needed to ask, one that only Beldam might be able to answer.
Well, wait. One more thing.
She called out.
Have you, felt anything strange in the shadows lately? Anything spooky? Are you mocking me?
Beldam stopped in her tracks for a moment, shook her head, and then continued on her way.
I haven't been in the shadows for years. Every time I went down there, I just felt you.
With that, she made her exit. Soon Vivian was alone again, but she didn't feel alone. As evening became night, the lengthening shadows crept down the alley walls like a slow swarm of ghostly, grasping hands.
You shouldn't be here.
They seemed to whisper again and again, shifting and constricting all around her.
You shouldn't be here. You don't belong. The darkness is mine.
End of chapter.